Welcome to FSDP Presents, a podcast by FSDP, Families for Sensible Drug Policy. This is Zach Rhoads. Today's guest is Todd Nilssen. Todd is a filmmaker and creator of the documentary The Last Stop. The Last Stop is a movie about the Élan School, a controversial treatment facility for so-called juvenile delinquents, which existed in the deep woods of Maine. That's existed, past tense, because the Élan School was closed down in 2011 due to allegations of abuse, which dated back to its opening in 1970. The word allegations may be understating things. Children who were getting in trouble at home, at school, perhaps with the law, kids whose behavior is so challenging that parents and loved ones are afraid for their well-being and don't know what to do with them. The Élan School posits itself as a therapeutic answer for these kids and their families' problems. The message that they wanted these families to hear is, if your kids don't get proper discipline from people like us, people who know what we're doing, then they are doomed to a life of prison or death or both. These children's parents and other family members believed that sending their kids to Élan was the only way that their children had any chance of a decent future. Many families went ahead and coughed up the hefty tuition and sent their kids to this allegedly premier rehabilitation and educational program. Kids were regularly taken then, once tuition was paid, from their homes, from large men who belonged to a third-party service called an escort service. They were put in a van, taken to a raised ranch in the middle of the woods in Maine. The philosophy behind the program, the way that the Élan staff were taught to treat children, was that they would break kids down emotionally to the greatest extent possible so that they could then build them back up. The breaking them down emotionally, which actually happened to be physically as well, included things like having a house meeting in which a person would stand in front of a crowd of other residents who would publicly harangue them, shouting threats, slurs, making jabs at their character, airing their grievances, or sending kids to a ring where they would put on boxing gloves and fight other students until they were eventually beaten. There have been stories in which students were put in a dumpster and forced to stay there for days at a time. Another student would stand guard, and if he let either of them get away, he or she would have to join them in the dumpster. And these aren't just allegations. They are actions that Joe Ricci, founder of the school, proudly explained to the media in an expose of the school, which was filmed in the 80s. And he defended these actions. Before the interview, I'll play you just a moment of one of the interviews with Joe Ricci. First, I want to say that my guest Todd Nielsen's film does a great job of describing not only the horrors of the school, but it also shows the viewer why the school was appealing. Why some of the school's alums swear that their experience made them better people. It shows that the school's ethics, loose as they were, did change with the times and for the better. And it allows parents who have sent their kids to the school or similar schools to hold two truths at once. On one hand, it's understandable why parents would want to send their kids there, why they felt it was in their kids' best interest. And on the other hand, the film provides a much-needed warning to folks who may be considering similar kinds of programs for their kids. It takes you through the story of Élan, stories from former residents, interviews with experts, and it explains why and how the school was finally shut down. So my guest, Todd Nilsen, who himself attended Élan, explains all of this and more in our interview. And before I take you to that interview, I'm going to play you a clip of a conversation with news media and founder of the school, Joe Ricci, who creeps me out. But I think it'll give you a sense of what we're talking about throughout the conversation. Remember that Todd Nilsen's movie, The Last Stop, is out today, May 19th, and I've provided a link to the film in the show notes. I know you'll enjoy the conversation, so as promised, and without further ado, here's a clip of the school's founder, Joe Ricci, and then followed by my interview with Todd Nilsen. Enjoy.
Joe, you make no bones about it. There is corporal punishment here at Élan. Tell us about it. What are the stages it comes in? Who's it administered by?
Well, it's administered by the kids, first of all. Corporal, it's a harsh term. Okay, what it is we have the ring, okay, which everybody misinterprets. It's not a boxing ring, it's a ring of human people. You know, we're a equal rights facility. We also use spanking, which is symbolic. Again, it's a last resort. Okay, and it's one resident spanking another resident, and it's done with a ping pong paddle, okay? And usually a person won't get spanked more than once or twice, but it's a symbolic thing, which is if you're going to act like a baby, you should be treated like a baby.
Well, when they spanked me, I mean, they didn't have to spank me, so I turned black and blue. Simple as that. I mean, that was just one time after another. I was so sore I couldn't sit down. Now, to me, that's a little ridiculous.
How often were you spanked?
Every day for a long time.
Hard.
Oh, yeah. Clipboards. Hands. Anything, you know. Something that they could, well, I would feel it, supposedly. They thought it would, I needed it because I supposedly was a terribly big baby.
So I'm here with Todd Nilsen, the producer of the documentary called The Last Stop. Todd, thanks for joining me.
Thank you, Zach. Great to be here.
Wow, a lot to dive into, man. I just watched your documentary, and I've been reading a lot about the school that it's centered around called the Élan School, a place in Maine that's ostensibly was a therapeutic sort of boarding school type or reform school, I think they touted themselves as, where people were sent there as a last stop before jail, perhaps death, and parents would send kids there in desperation. It was an expensive for-profit school. And like a lot of similar schools in recent times, they had a long history of just really abusive behavior all around. And of course, I'm going to stop there because anything that I'm saying, you could just repeat, but with more detail. The film highlights, I think in a pretty fair way, the troubles that people faced while they were there. And I think troubles would be downplaying, you know, maybe that's not a strong enough kind of a word, while also explaining that there's a reason why it was able to last for its, I think, over 40-year existence, because there were some aspects of that place that allowed people to gain a little purchase in a social group or maybe better themselves in some ways. And so I'd love you to help me tease all that apart. Before we go anywhere, could you just tell people a little bit about yourself and what inspired you? What was your basis for creating this documentary? And then we can get into talking about the school.
Yeah, so I am a filmmaker and editor based out of New York City. And I went to Élan back in 2005, and I graduated in 2007. And when I got out, I sort of forgot about the school for a little while, but then thoughts started coming in again. I started thinking about it. I started joining some groups about the school from people who went to the school, and started sort of looking into its history and the history surrounding the school and other schools like it, because Élan is just part of a bigger industry. And I realized that what I went through wasn't very normal. I kind of just always thought Élan was just something that happens to bad kids, when they're bad, that it was normal. Like, you commit a crime, you go to jail. If you're a bad kid, you go to a place like Élan. And I didn't realize after getting out that I had gone through something very unique and something kind of, truly kind of bizarre in a way. And, being, working in film and working in video, I realized, and, seeing that there really haven't been any documentaries done about Élan or any school really like it, I thought it was a great opportunity to kind of put that story to film in a visual and audio aspect. So people can kind of understand, what it was like being there, what the daily regimen was like, what kind of kids went there, and how it sort of fit into the whole rehabilitation world. You said it was a therapeutic school. It was the proper name for these places are behavioral modification programs. They don't really bill themselves. They kind of play with the names a little bit. They might call themselves, like a school, like an education sort of school, or a rehabilitation. But really, the proper name would be behavioral modification, because their goal is to take your behavior and modify it and change it. So that's the ultimate goal. So working on the film and meeting people that had gone there years before me and years after me, we all shared the same kind of camaraderie. Even if somebody went there in the 70s, and I went there in the 2000s, it was like instant connection. It's really been kind of a journey, and I'm just glad that the film is out there now, and people, I constantly get emails, I'm going down the troubled teen rabbit hole. And I'm really glad that your film is there to kind of help explain it and put it into a kind of cohesive package that, helps people understand.
You were a student there, or an alum, and you were there from 2005 to 2007. I want to dive into some of the details because as painful as they are, they're breathtaking. And it's just one of those stories that we've heard a lot of, in different domains too, where some horrific thing is happening and it's happening right underneath our noses. And you look back and it's only seemingly in retrospect that you would say, how could anyone have let all those things go on? So right. Before we delve into that, I'm just curious, what tipped you off when you left the school? You said you had some sense that, whatever happened to you was sort of just, it's almost like you had a bad weekend. What happened to you is what happens to kids who are bad. So what tipped you off, when you got out?
It was really talking to other people who also had been there. When you're there at the school, you're sort of in a mindset, like you're it's like being in a grind, because constantly, you're never not doing anything there. I could go into like the daily schedule, but basically you're always functioning in a way. You're either cleaning something, you're either writing reports on somebody, you're either in a group or, scrubbing a toilet or whatever. You're always doing something, and you never really have time to think like, what is going on around me? You know what I mean? What are the, implications of what's being done to me? You just think it's what you have to do to get out. It's like a fight or flight thing. You're doing what you have to do to get out of this program.
You're hypervigilant.
And then when you get out, you're just like, oh, I'm out, finally. You know what I mean? I can go back to my life. Not for everybody. Not everybody did go back to their life. So I just kind of forgot about it. I was just glad to be out. So how I kind of, got back into it is just talking to other people and hearing their experiences and seeing the damage it did to people, the help it provided to people, and, especially some of the bizarre stories that I've heard. Élan did change a lot. By the time that I was in Élan, it had changed a lot. And during the 70s and the 80s, it was a lot more brutal than when I was there. It was still brutal, but it was a lot more brutal back then and a lot more unforgiving. The documentary follows the kind of evolution of this place, how it changed and what it was like back in the day, and how those things kind of through advocacy and child protective services and, the states kind of starting to come down on them, how things did kind of change. It wasn't enough, obviously. But yeah.
The school's trajectory kind of followed some semblance of a moral arc. I guess I hear you saying, like, it wasn't quite as bad when you attended. Right.
Yeah, it had to change with the times, no doubt, while keeping that kind of their core concepts, that sort of attack therapy kind of concept. We're gonna beat you down until you change. Without that, the school doesn't work. But really, in the end, the school couldn't survive. One of the things that really brought about the end of the school is the internet, and I think this is one of the kind of the beautiful parts of the story, is that the people who brought accountability to Élan were the kids who went there. By forming online campaigns, by manipulating searches, by authoring websites, detailing what happened at the school. So nowadays, parents go online and they search, okay, Élan School, maybe I should send my kid there, and all these things pop up saying, no, you shouldn't send your kid here. You know what I mean? And so that really put a damper on their wallet, and eventually they had to shut down. So it's interesting because it was not any state regulation or breaking of any codes or whatnot that closed Élan, or any school like it for that matter. It's very rare that these schools actually get shut down by the authorities. It's usually because of economic reasons that they can't continue.
If I'm going to go reverse chronologically here, could you name maybe one or a couple experiences that you had while you were there? And we'll just note that this is as the school is changing with the times. This would be perhaps its most charitable light that we could see it, yet you still noticed that there were things that you were going through while you were there that just were not part of the norm, or perhaps not healthy. Could you shine some light on what a couple of those things could have been?
Yeah. First off, I think it would be good if I explained what Élan used to do. And I want to also touch on how Élan works. So the core idea behind Élan is that they're going to break you down and then build you back up. And to do that, they use humiliation tactics, such as, dressing people in bizarre costumes. If a girl liked a boy or something, or showed that she liked a boy, or maybe flirted with a guy, they would dress her up as a prostitute. or they would put a sign on her saying, I'm a whore, please ask me why. I'm just going to end up on the street one day. Constant confrontation, screaming in people's faces, screaming, in groups at each other about how horrible the other person is, and extremely using, curse words. I can show you a link to a sample clip of how these feelings sounded. It's really bizarre. So, all of these tactics they sort of use to break you down, and then they would build you back up. Now, when I was there, they got rid of a lot of these things. Oh, and by the way, they also had a thing called the ring, which somebody acted out violently, or somebody, you didn't even have to act out violently. Let's say you just were not participating in the program, and this is a last resort they relied on. They would put you in not a boxing ring, but a ring of people, so a circle of people, and they would put boxing gloves on you and somebody bigger than you, and you would duke it out. And you never won. They would just keep sending in kids until you were beat down. And it's to show you, strangely, that violence never solves anything. There's always going to be somebody that's going to beat you. So they had kind of reasons behind everything they did. So now a lot of this stuff over the years obviously sort of went away. You know what I mean? Like they couldn't dress people in costumes anymore, or put them in boxing rings. The states just weren't going to have it. It just does not look good.
I still would love to return to some of those and dig at them in a little bit of detail.
Yeah. Okay, a lot of those things went away over the years, and they got rid of them. Now, when I was there, they still had the screaming. People were still getting up in your face. And one of the things they still had that was definitely downright abusive was the corner, and that had been in Élan since the beginning. And basically, if you were not participating in the program and you did not do what you were told to do, you were put in a corner, and you were to face the corner from the beginning of the day to the end of the day. And there were kids who sat in the corner for months. Not exaggerating, for months. They would get taken out of the corner, given a general meeting, where a general meeting is when like 20 or so kids, rush up to you and surround you and scream in your face. And then they would take you and put you back in the corner. So, it's just complete isolation, and it sucks. There's no doubt about it. You're facing a corner, and especially as a kid, where you have energy and you want to talk and interact, imagine how that feels. And there was a kid there that was like 13 years old who would face the corner for months. And it was just, I didn't think of it at the time, but thinking of it now, it's just downright abusive. And then a few of the aspects of the program were also really problematic to me, like the fact that nobody there was trained in any sort of therapeutic or psychological practice. Everybody there was a graduate of the program. They did bring in some people, that wanted to get a career in, education, or a career, working with kids. But for the most part, the longtime staff there were graduates of the program who went on to work there. And they thought, okay, well, we've been through these experiences, so we have the ability to help others who have been through these experiences. Because it helped us, it will help them. And I should also say that Élan didn't really have any way of kind of sorting out who came into the program. It's if you had the money to go there, then you were let in. And by the way, when I was there, it was $54,000 a year to go there, more than Harvard at that time. Looking back, those are the things that really stuck out to me the most. The fact that nobody there really seemed to have a clue as to what they were doing. They were just doing what they felt was right.
Those are things that happened to you while you were there?
No, for me, I very quickly realized what was going on, and how I realized what the game was, right? So I realized that if I want to get out of here, I need to do what I'm told to do, and I need to do the program. And by the way, I should also say that when I was there, I was 17, and I turned 18 very quickly after I had come there. And when you're 18, you can sign out of the program. They don't make it easy, but you can sign out of the program if you want to. It's actually very rare that people did sign out. And the reason for that is because they kind of drilled into your head that if you leave, that you're going to die, or you're going to end up on the street, or your parents aren't going to take you home, or your life is going to be miserable, or whatever. And they drill that into your head on a day-to-day basis. So I was, I guess you could say, brainwashed. I mean, I want to get more into my how I felt after the program a little later, but I guess you could say I was convinced that if I left the program, that I was going to die and that I was going to fail in life. So I stayed, and I worked through the program, and I was out in 2 years. So a lot of bad things really didn't happen. A lot of those things didn't really happen to me because I quickly acclimated to the program. But I saw those things happen to a lot of other people. Like I said, there was a 13-year-old kid, I'll never forget him, that they just constantly dragged through all these awful things. and it never did anything. He never got better. You know what I mean? It obviously was not working, but they kept him there because of the money.
So the reason I wanted to go in that order of talking about your experience is because I'm tempted to point out some people who could be naysayers of your message, which you made impossible by virtue of the evidence that your film was grounded in. That's one of the reasons I appreciate projects like this, is because, for instance, in the 80s, we had a wave of people who were convinced by these psychotherapeutic techniques that they had repressed memories of being abused or being things happening to them. They were sure, because of this Freudian psychoanalysis that was being done, that, you know, parents or teachers of the past were abusing them, and they were just remembering things in vivid detail. And of course, what we recognized was that memories can be created post hoc. There can be false memories of what has happened. And it could be easy for a critic who's maybe drunk a little too much of the false memory Kool-Aid to say, well, Jesus, these kids now, they've gotten together, they're reminiscing. Isn't it possible that these are just old tales that they were telling? Is it really the case that this school was so bad?
But it doesn't take so much digging into this story before you figure out that can't be the case.
So first of all, there's the fact that it got shut down. Second of all, the documentary just goes through this chronology of the school's existence and ubiquitous stories of, you know, people's experiences there, and they all line up. So I wonder if we could kind of go through it and talk about, I don't know, starting from earlier days, what was the school's basis for existing, and what was it like when people found out, if a kid, say, found out that they were going to be going to that school? How did they first make their entrance into school? And then what were they experiencing when they were there? I guess feel free to also add in we can go into detail with some of the things you listed before, and we can even talk about some of the more, you know, insidious procedures that were happening. So I guess just give a walkthrough of the genesis and what a person's life would be like if they were going through the school.
Yeah, I mean, so first off, Élan came from a place called Synanon. And Synanon was kind of the first of these therapeutic communities. And it was created by a guy named Charles Diedrich, who thought that Alcoholics Anonymous wasn't tough enough and wasn't doing enough for people, you know, especially for people that were addicted to drugs. They didn't really have a place to go because Alcoholics Anonymous didn't think of them as the same. And Narcotics Anonymous was kind of, you know, just kind of starting up at the time. So Synanon came along. And, you know, Charles Diedrich created this philosophy that, you know, in order to recover from your addiction, you need to be confronted about it. You know, not talking about just how you feel and this and that. You need to be really confronted. You know what I mean? You know, why do you do these things? You know, why are you slacking off? And in you know, very, very, you know, in a very harsh way. And, you know, it was a tough love kind of thing. You know, the addiction needs to be kind of beat out of you. And what happened is people graduated or left Synanon, and they thought, like, wow, this worked. I'm cured. I'm going to go start my own institution now. You know what I mean? You know, Daytop came along, Daytop Village. You know, Phoenix House came along, CEDU, Straight Incorporated, and, you know, all of these kind of came from Synanon because it was like, wow, this is this new cure. It works. People were getting people off addiction. And then they started to gear it towards kids. You know what I mean? Because there was a real market there for kids that were, you know, getting into drugs, especially during the 70s, you know, 80s, you know, doing, you know, smoking, you know, marijuana or taking acid or whatever. You know, this was a big thing. And there was a big scare around for parents, you know, the just say no thing and, you know, Richard Nixon saying, you know, drugs are our biggest enemy. People were scared, and they needed a place to help their kids, or they thought they did. So these places marketed themselves like, oh, we can help them, send them to us. And so parents did. And it was it was a booming industry. It still kind of is, but it really was a booming industry. I mean, it was, you know, there's a lot of these places. There's still a lot, and there used to be, you know, a lot more under this umbrella of the troubled teen industry. So what would a daily, you know, kind of experience there be like for a kid? You know, it changed. It's different on every program. I can just say for Élan, you know, normally, you know, you wake up, you clean your dorm, and then you hit the floor, and, you know, most of the day you're functioning. So the house is split into different offices. You had the service crew, the business office, the communications office, the expediters, and the coordinators. And each office had a different responsibility in the house. The house, if you think about it, was kind of like a microcosm of society. That's what they called it. The business office handled, business aspects, like paperwork, supplies like pencils, pens, notebooks, sundries like your soap and, your deodorant, whatever. The communications office was responsible. They were kind of like your news people. They brought in news from the outside world and planned events and stuff. The expediters were the security force. They guarded doors. They checked on people to make sure they were doing what they were doing, wrote reports on people, kind of like spies. And then you had, the kitchen crew. They handled the food, obviously. And then the coordinators, they ran the house. So it really was, the whole program was run by the kids. The adults just kind of, hung back and watched and kind of, pushed people along. But everything was run by the kids. It was a self-functioning society within the house. And you worked your way up through these positions until you graduated. And every time you worked up through a position, you would get more responsibility, get more trust. When you first entered the program, you can't go into a room alone. You can't go to the bathroom alone. You can't talk to people without, somebody of a higher position listening in on you. Very, very strict, jail time, jail times 10. You couldn't, read books that you wanted to read. You couldn't listen to music that you wanted to listen to. You were completely sort of subservient to the community until you gained these privileges. So you worked your way up through the program by participating, by going to group, talking about your feelings, confronting people, and doing well at your job. So you would function most of the day doing your job, whether it's getting the meal ready or filling out paperwork or making art for the walls or whatever. There were all these philosophies all over the wall, like, a journey of 1,000 miles begins in a single step, hope, whatever. And then midday you would go to groups, and we had encounter groups, and that's where you would scream at people and confront them about, how they either made you angry or jealous or concerned or whatever. You had to confront them. And then we would have general meetings. If somebody was really acting out in the house, everybody in the house would get their feelings off for that person, scream in their face, and then confront them as to, how their attitude is affecting the whole house. It really was kind of, the military uses a very kind of similar tactic in that if one soldier is not performing correctly, then everybody in the troop would be punished. And that was very much how Élan worked. If one person was lagging behind, everybody in the house would be punished. And you could see how that might make you extremely angry at that one individual. Everybody might not get dessert. And in a place where you're already not getting a lot of food and you're hungry or, you're tired, you're going to be really angry at that person. That's the basic kind of structure of the program and how it worked.
Talk to me about some of the ways, like if it's going to be called a behavior modification program, then I think just by virtue of that, they're going to be using behavior reinforcements, whether they're negative reinforcements or positive. And of course, by watching the documentary,
right,
they've clearly honed in on negative reinforcements. Talk about some of those and the ideas behind why they did them and what the experiences were like of being negatively reinforced for something.
What they called negative reinforcement, or what they called punishments, were learning experiences. That was how they dubbed it. If you did something, and it could really be anything, expediters, like I said, I explained what they are, kind of like policemen, were constantly writing down what you did wrong. And they would submit those reports to the chief expediter, and the chief expediter would form an incident sheet, and then that would go to the coordinator, who would write out a punishment. Again, all of these are kids. There's no authoritative individual, staff, professionally trained involved. This is all us doing this. Let's say I took an extra milk at the table or something. Well, an incident report would get written on me, and I would be sent to what's called a dealing crew, and they would scream at me. They would say, you did this because you think you're entitled and selfish, and you always got your way at home, and if you continue this into the future, you're going to just be whatever psychobabble you wanted to scream at the person. And it sounded very robotic. It's not as if you hear one of these dealing crews, it sounds extremely robotic because nobody was really into it. You just had to do it. And then they might send you to scrub a toilet or something like that. Scrub a toilet, scrub the floor all day or whatever. But if you kept doing that, the punishments would get more severe. which could include getting a general meeting, which is where everybody in the house screams at you, and it's extremely humiliating. And you're getting spit in the face, and people are yelling about how they hate you so much and how they want to kick your ass and how much of a loser you are, and whatever. Just imagine almost like a kind of a sea of screaming faces at you. Then you would be sent to scrub a floor or something like that. And if you kept acting out, you would be put into the corner, and you would face the corner until you were ready to come out. And like I said, there were kids who would sit in there for months. They refused to participate in the program, or they just couldn't, you know what I mean? There were kids there who were very young. There were kids there who had, learning disabilities or behavioral problems, and that might have needed medication. By the way, they didn't allow any medication there, psychotropic medication, that just couldn't acquiesce to the program. So this was just constantly happening to them, just a cycle of getting screamed at, going into the corner, getting screamed at, going into the corner, scrubbing floors. And, it just became, a normal everyday thing. So during my time, that's kind of how the punishments and how that negative, reinforcement worked. And now there was positive reinforcement too. This might sound ridiculous, but if you did well, you might get a soda. And I know that sounds ridiculous, but a soda, when you have nothing but milk and like water to drink, or some gross juice that they put way too much sugar in, is nice. So, if you get a soda for, tattling on somebody, that was some reinforcement for you. Or maybe you get a home visit or something. Maybe you can go talk to your family for an extra, 30 minutes or something like that. Or listen to music for an extra 10 minutes in the dorms or whatever. So yeah, that's how they kind of reinforce behavior.
And obviously, you're talking about how the school is changing with the times. And of course, you think about everything you just said, that being the best that the school is able to become, ethically speaking,
right?
That it sort of makes you sick. We know better. Yeah. We knew better when you were going there, and we know better now. Talk about some of the historically, some of the gross and the negligent kind of punishment people could expect if they were not able to cohere to the program.
People that were there, way before me during that early time, they have stories that are just, insane. From getting sauce poured on their head and getting dressed in bizarre costumes and literally getting beat up in a room off to the side or behind every off to the side or something like that. It was extremely violent back then, and it was still and there's always this like kind of rift in the Élan community, who had it the worst. But it really is relative. You don't think of it that way. It's kind of relative. And it was the best. They wanted to keep their core philosophy, the breakdown and build up philosophy. They wanted to keep that. And because in a way, when a parent is getting a call and their kid is saying, "Oh, Mom, I'm doing great. They're treating me well, or I'm really changing and starting to get in touch with my feelings." Behind that call is actually, somebody watching the call, listening in on the call, and reporting on it. Mm-hmm. And if you don't say the right thing, then you're obviously going to get punished. If you say, "Hey, Mom, they're kicking my ass here, they're screaming at me," you're going to get in trouble. So they needed to keep that in order for the program to kind of, I think, function and kind of keep its reputation that it had, because people thought it did work. And for some people it did, but people really, relied on it. And there were states sending kids to this place. They were backed by the government. New York State sent a lot of kids there. So they needed to prove their results. And like I said to you before we talked, to fix somebody, or, I say that with quotes, to fix somebody in a short amount of time, even in 2 years, and to prove that requires a certain amount of force. You know what I mean? You need to force them along. So I think that's why they were able to. That's why they kind of, although they got rid of a lot of those kind of sort of bizarre punishments, they did kind of keep their basic structure, and they needed it to prove their worth.
Again, before we were talking about the ways that people tend to error correct their own lives over time. And you're saying, the program is aware that if they just give people room to grow, then they might not they want to expedite the process. And so they might not get the quote unquote results that people are looking for, or at least that are good for optics.
And parents want that too, though. They want they want a quick fix as well.
That's right, exactly. So I guess there's a reason why a hefty tuition is actually good for all of this. It's good for the lining the pockets of people that run the school, and it gives parents a sense that, all right, well, I better get the best of their whatever their MO is. I better see those results in real time.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, $54,000 a year. And by the way, the place was like a rundown shack in the woods. It was not like a nice place that looked like kids were paying $54,000 a year to be at. It was a rundown shack. Definitely. Yeah, I mean, but those are features of the program. I mean, the more you put somebody in an uncomfortable situation, the more they're going to want to get out of it, and the faster they're going to want to get out of it, and the faster they're going to need to prove their worth that they're going to get out of it. You know what I mean? So, I mean, it really is, their philosophy was a way to expedite that process. And for the most part, it didn't work on a lot of kids. I have a lot of my friends, have died, have committed suicide or died in other ways, or, are still addicted to drugs. Their lives have not gotten back on track. So does it work in the long term? Obviously, maybe for some, and I'm not going to sit here and tell you that we were all innocent, angels, and that we were just being, I don't even like to use the word abuse, really, because there were some kids there that had done heinous things and things that I had done that were very not good things to do, not, that a human should do. We weren't angels. We needed help, and we had problems. Was this the solution? Well, that's for you to decide if you view the documentary.
Right. What's your sense? I mean, you said obviously some people aren't getting better. Some people seem to have done worse than maybe they could have. And I'm thinking of that perhaps some people grew up and became something and are successful despite the program, not by virtue of it. What is your sense? What do you think percentage-wise?
Let me tell you. I mean, I'm not bragging, but I think I did pretty well after leaving the program. And, I kind of did get my life together. I still struggle, but for the most part, I'm healthy and, my life's not awful. For me, I look at everything that I've been through as kind of a stepping stone to where I am now. Would I have gotten better just naturally, just kind of growing up and becoming more mature? Possibly. I don't know. It's also very possible I didn't. It's very possible if I didn't go to Élan, I could have ended up in a gutter somewhere. I don't know, and I'm not willing to take that risk. If I could, magically, if I could just erase that part of my life and, see what happens, I wouldn't take that risk. But a real problem with the program is that if you didn't acquiesce to the program and you didn't do what you were supposed to do and work your way through the program, you only saw the negative aspects of the program. You know what I mean? Like that kid who I said was just constantly in and out of the corner. He never got up. He never went through any of the ranks and got up to the second half of the program, which is where they really put their trust in you and let you kind of be yourself. And a lot of kids left like that, constantly being told how big of a failure they are and how much of a loser they are and how they'll never succeed. And it's like leaving, it's like, kind of like a half-baked thing, you're taking the bread out of the oven too fast. And, that's malpractice on their part, no doubt. And again, I attribute that to the fact that they had no way of screening people, took people based on if they could afford it. So there was a lack of care there. The administration definitely didn't care whether you survived or not. And then they could use you if you did fail as an example to the others, which they did often.
The staff there didn't have a screening process for who they thought they would be able or not be able to help. They did, I think it was Maya called it in your film, a wallet biopsy. How thick is your wallet?
That's a good term for it because that's exactly what it was. When I went there, first of all, by the way I went there, I was woken up in the middle of the night, ripped out of bed by two guys, two big like Marine guys, and they drove me up to Maine. That's something that traumatizes me still to this day. I'll never forget that, ever. More than the program. And, if any industry needs to be shut down, it's that one, definitely. And they're called escort services. Kids should not be ripped out of bed by big guys and sent up to God knows where.
Was that's a third party service?
Yeah, they're called escort services, and there's a lot of them. And their job is to take you and just take you out of bed in the middle of the night when you're kind of half asleep, throw you in a van and drive you up to wherever. And they do it by force. If you try to run away, it'll grab you, put your hands behind your back and put you in a van. And these aren't police officers. They're just some guys, just some guys that are physically adept and can do it. Very violating. They called it the Élan snatch back in the day. That's what they called it.
Tell me about this sort of hierarchical order. One part of that positive reinforcement, or ostensibly positive reinforcement, was that you got to move up ranks. And how did that work?
Yeah, so you started as a worker when you came into the program, which is, basically you're just cleaning stuff. And then you work your way up through the ranks. You become a ramrod, which is where you oversee a small crew of workers. And then you become an expediter, which is where you're a security guard, like I said before. Then you become a department head. You lead a department. And then you become a coordinator, which is kind of like being the CEO of a department. And also you run the house. And you work your way up through there by participating, obviously, in the therapeutic aspects of the program, participating in groups, doing your job that you need to do, with pride. If you're cleaning, you're really cleaning and not just kind of getting over on it. And they will give you evaluations along the way as to whether you can go to the next position or not. And then you could get shot down at any point, in your journey through the hierarchy. And that's when you're just scrubbing floors all day. You're stuck at the bottom level. You're scrubbing floors. You have no privileges, nothing. You're just scrubbing floors. You're basically, and you're kind of a leech on the house because people need to watch you, and, you can't really do anything else. So, and that makes people angry at you, and that makes them want to confront you. So yeah, so that's how you kind of go through the steps of the program, is just by participating in the program as much as you can.
One of the villain-like characters, and unfortunately he was a real person, of your film was
one of the founders, Joe Ricci.
Tell me about the days of Joe Ricci. I mean, I would watch those interviews with him, and they were interviews by news media trying to, I suppose, even though it's kind of softball questions, they were kind of interrogating him like, hey, this kind of seems odd. It doesn't really seem commonsensical. What's going on here? And he had this way about him. I'll let you tell me more, but he was just cold, a cold personality that made you feel, as the questioner, like, how could you be so dumb as not to understand what's really going on here, you idiot? And it was something about that gave me, right. I think I just gave me chills. So talk about him and talk about the period of time in which he was running things.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, Joe was dead by the time I got there. I think he died, I think it was in 2001. I think so. Yeah, 2001. Yeah. So he was dead by the time I got there. But when he was alive, he was the powerhouse. He was the guy that, led the school. And that was really during that time from 2001 to 1970 when it started. That was Élan at its best. Well, I don't want to say best. I mean, it was like Élan at his most powerful. He knew how to run that place, and he knew how to keep it going. And he was a unique character. I mean, the guy walked around with gold chains. He drove, a Mercedes. I think he had a Rolls Royce as well. He had a fur coat. He had like a fedora with, people say he looked like a pimp. And, he called himself the god of therapy. Like he was, the Lord of this place, and he knew how to fix people. And he had gone to Daytop. It's a Daytop village. And Daytop is the foundation of Élan. It's very, very similar program. If you walk into Daytop, you'll see a lot of what Élan was. Daytop is still around, but they do have a unique reputation. They have a good reputation, I think. You can leave Daytop if you want. Élan, you couldn't leave. If you tried to walk out the door, they would tackle you. So Joe came from Daytop, and he graduated from Daytop and thought like, oh, well, I did so well in this program, I'm going to start my own program. And he started, a few, small programs, and then landed on Élan. And Élan was his big thing. But so, like I said, a lot of these places came from other institutions that did the same practice, and people thought they could do it themselves. And Joe was one of those people, and he was a businessman. He owned a racetrack, a horse racing track. He owned a lot of property. He ran for governor. I mean, he was like, people saw him as like an entrepreneur, somebody who was, really, really business savvy and, a go-getter. And he knew how to manipulate the media. He knew how to kind of skew the narrative in his favor. When people were saying, oh, Élan is abusing kids, he would say, no, that's a conspiracy. And these people obviously don't care about kids. They just want to see kids fail. I care about kids. Right. We're going to help them. And we're not going to let anybody get in our way. Right. So he was very manipulative. But yeah, he was a character. And if you saw him, he was, from what people tell me, he demanded respect in a room. If you walked in, everybody sat right up. Even if you weren't in Élan, he commanded a room. And he was very, very charismatic. And a lot of people who do run these programs are that way. You kind of have to be.
You didn't know him, and I know that as a filmmaker, I'm sure that you want the viewer of the film to make opinions for themselves. I don't know if I could get this out of you. Do you believe that he believed that he was doing what was best for kids, or do you believe that he just did whatever he thought was best for himself?
Oh, I think he just wanted to make money. Yeah. Absolutely. No doubt. I mean, he's, you saw the interviews with him. I mean, first of all, he might be good at making money, but he doesn't really seem like a very intelligent person. You know what I mean? Like he doesn't say anything that is that, and we're limited on what we can hear from him because there weren't, that many stories done about him, but he doesn't really have that sort of intelligence. Now, the other person that ran the program, Gerald Davidson, was a licensed psychologist. Right. And he ran the program with Joe because he had the medical license because he could look official, but Joe really ran the program. I mean, he was just, Gerald Davidson was just there to collect his income as well. And Joe ran the day-to-day operations. But yeah, absolutely. I mean, the guy was, like I said, he walked around like he was, with, like I said, with gold chains and fur coats and Rolls Royces. I mean, he obviously liked to make money. And he liked the attention too. Like, it's kind of ironic that the guy owned a horse racing track, which is very like, if you think of like vices, people betting and drinking and
yeah.
That doesn't really like go along with somebody who would also run a therapeutic school for kids that needed help.
He obviously thrived on people's inability to make good decisions for themselves.
Yeah, and he demanded respect. He wanted to be looked at, and he wanted to be kind of like, he wanted to be the guy, you know what I mean? I mean, he was an Italian guy from New York, growing up in that kind of environment. And he did. He was very successful in what he did. But at the cost of what?
One of the segments that you showed kind of juxtaposed his dumbing down of the accusations levied against him versus some of the things that the people who were attending the school explained. So I won't tell them all, but for instance, there was that one, they said, well, you some of the punishments that you do are using spanking. Talk about that. And he was saying, right. Oh, God, people call it corporal punishment, strong term. And you call it spanking. Yeah, sometimes we got other kids hitting a kid with a paddle, and it's metaphorical, and it's just saying you treat,
Yeah, just once or twice.
Yeah. Right, just once or twice. And then it'd go zoom to a person saying, yeah, I would just beat it repeatedly a few times for each kid. And, black and blue, couldn't sit down. It was just such obvious, he wasn't accidentally telling him his truth. He was clearly lying pathologically about his program and knew that he needed to.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, he knew what the media was going to run with. He wasn't stupid. Like I said, when I say he wasn't intelligent, I don't mean that he couldn't figure out what was in his best interest. I'm just saying as somebody who runs a therapeutic school that is dealing with psychological issues, he doesn't seem very intelligent in that way. But as somebody who's running businesses, who is trying to, bring in, make turn Élan into a big, company and get his horse racing track out there and his properties. He's very intelligent in that way, and he could trick the media in that aspect. Right. And you have to also consider if somebody were to come out against the program, like, especially at that time when there was no internet, then, he could just turn around and say with all his, the staff members, people that work there, well, this is just a troubled kid who couldn't make it in the program and is obviously, look at him, he's doing drugs, his family doesn't even want him, don't listen to him, Right. And he would run with that. He could definitely run with that. So, he knew what he was doing. There's no doubt about that. And, if he survived to this day, I think Élan might still be there. He would be very old by that time, but the Joe Ricci of that time today, I think he could still run Élan like successfully.
You said, maybe he would have been able to keep it alive. It did shut down Can you talk about how and why?
Yeah, so I mean, the way it shut down, in my, one of my friends refers to it as like, Frankenstein's monster coming back to get him. There was a big internet campaign put out by people who had gone to the school and wanted to expose it. So people formed web pages, they formed, forums and groups where they could talk in, and manipulated the search terms, people that were more internet savvy, into making these web pages and documents about Élan, about how harmful it was, kind of to show up first. And in an age where people are on the internet and parents are researching these places before they send their kids there, which is really a really good thing. You should definitely research a place before you send your child there. All these things were popping up saying that this is a horrible place. They put people in the boxing ring, they scream at you, they throw you in the corner, you scrub all day, et cetera, et cetera. So parents stopped sending their kids there. New York State, actually got tipped off, and they went in and they said, we're not sending our kids here anymore either. Although I have a feeling that was probably because they didn't want to pay for it anymore, not because they really cared about the kids. But yeah, so people, sort of exposed the school, the kids who had went there, and, put a damper on their wallet, so they couldn't afford to run the school anymore without new people coming in. And by the time it shut down, I think there were only about in its heyday, Élan had hundreds of kids. When I was there, it must have had 120 total or 140. And then, by the time it ended, it had maybe I think 20 kids or something like that. So the internet campaign obviously worked.
It got me wondering, do you think that there are similar schools that provide equal maltreatment as this one that are still in existence? Or do you think that they've sort of diminished over time, or that insofar as there are schools that are maltreating kids or other people, that they're
definitely. I mean, it's hard to pinpoint, because again, these places are kind of kept under wraps, and the whole industry is kind of an underground industry. People don't really talk about it that much. And whenever people see my documentary, they say, I had no idea these places existed. Well, they do, and there's a lot still out there. And if you search, online, if you do your due diligence, there are websites that detail the things that go on inside a lot of these programs that are still running. And a lot of people might run a program, and that program will shut down, and they'll go on to run another program in another state or something like that. Because there's no government oversight on these schools, they're not classified into any one particular classification. They can just kind of resell themselves as different things and do whatever they want to do. So I think until there's some sort of federal regulation on these programs, and kind of a way to classify them as a certain place, not just a behavioral modification program or a rehab or an OTC, officer training camp or whatever, these places are just going to still keep popping up. And they're very profitable. They really are. Again, because before we talked, I said they have one of the great marketing aspects, which is they target parents who are afraid that their kid is going to die or end up on the street. So they're very profitable, and yeah, they still exist. Yeah, are they as vicious as Élan was? I'm not in these places, so I can't tell. I've heard stories. I've heard a lot of crazy stories about different places. One school had a lap dance therapy, from my understanding, which I don't know. Maya can actually tell you more about that. Very strange things still going on. But I think Élan, in its own way, was extremely outward as to how violent they were. Joe Ricci is there in the news, in that expose that you probably saw, just saying yeah, we have a boxing ring. I don't need to convince you they had one. You have the director of the school there saying that we have it.
Do you think that it's possible that there could be people who attended a school that they may have hated, but that really was overall basically ethical? And then I don't think that's the case with this one. I really don't. But then people could get together, run an internet campaign, and take down an otherwise, somewhat decent school. Or do you think that this would definitely be something unique? Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, especially today with cancel culture and everything, I think there's no doubt about it. But that's, people need there needs to be inspections into these places.
And, people need to, but the problem with inspections is Élan got inspected plenty of times. And they told the kids before inspections, like, look, if you say the wrong thing, you're going to be in trouble. You're going to be put in the corner. You're going to have a general meeting. And if we do get shut down, then they're just going to send you to prison. So they did manipulate the investigation. So it's really hard to kind of go into these places because they clean up everything when investigators do come. I think that there needs to be evidence as to that the school is doing the wrong thing, and there needs to be corroborating evidence amongst the kids that went there so their stories don't change. Like if you talk to people from Élan, they'll all say the same thing without any they're all going to say, yeah, this is how this was and this is how this was. And they won't even say it in a way that's like, oh, this was crazy, or this was so bad or whatever. It's just this is how it was. So yeah, of course kids could get out and say, the school abused me when it didn't. But then you have to look to other people that went there and look to people that went there that might have had a positive experience at these places, but can attest to the fact that they saw things wrong going on in there. Right. Like that's kind of how I feel about it. I don't totally fault Élan, and I did take some valuable lessons from there, but I saw things in there that were definitely wrong. There's absolutely no doubt about it. So I do come from a place of honesty. I'm not out to get anybody. So it's hard. It's hard to kind of figure out what's going on in other places like Élan, when they're very good at covering up what they do. And, there are some disgruntled people that leave these places. But again, if stories match, then it's tough to deny it.
Before we go, and before I let you tell people how to access your work and the film, I just want to say that having watched it, I really believe that when you're making a documentary, and I think you did it the right way, I suppose you have to be sort of above board that you're painting a narrative, for sure. If there's no narrative, there's no story. But at the same time, I think you gave everyone a fair shake. I mean, right. I don't think anything was so obviously jaded in one direction than another. I really do see that you left in people's accounts, like you said, that I had a basically okay time, and for my part, maybe it made me more pro-social than antisocial, but I did see all these things that, there's accusations that are levied against them. I did see all of them happen. And so I walked away from the movie saying, Jesus, I cannot believe that something like this has been allowed to exist for so long. But I guess I'll let other people choose for themselves what they believe. Did I leave anything out before we go that you think would be good to talk about?
Yeah, let me touch on what you just said, because in being in doing this documentary and being at Élan myself and talking to a lot of people that went there, I can't say I've really talked to anybody that like over exaggerated their experience there, because you don't need to. You know what I mean? It was what it was. You know what I mean? And like I said, I'm not out to get anybody, but if you see the film, anybody out there listening to this, if you see the film, that's how it was in the film. You know what I mean? You don't need to over exaggerate what went on at Élan. There are people that come up with stories like, oh yeah, there were kids at Élan that were murdered and sexually abused and et cetera, et cetera. I'm not here to include that because I can't back that up. You know what I mean? But I can prove that the structure and the what Élan was true. There are documents, there's news reports, there's everybody who says these things, they all say the same thing. So I'm not here to kind of get at anybody. I'm not like out to get that ran this place or anything. I think they should just walk away and maybe think about what they did. But a lot of people that worked there were students of the school at one time. They were in it as well, and they were convinced that this was the way to help people. I can't fault them for that. And a lot of them, some of those staff members and some of those people that were there were good people, no doubt about it, and they did care. So I'm not out to get anybody. Élan's shut down. It's over. They're not taking any more people. But I just want people to know that these places do exist and that these stories are true. And ideally, I want people that have gone through a place like this to have something to show other people so those people will believe them.
Yeah, well, thank you. You've certainly given that. This is fabulous work. it's very rare, especially in the days of YouTube and Netflix, that I can sit and watch something for, I think, over an hour without moving. And this really was. I was fascinating in some of the best ways. So I thank you for making it. How do people access it? And I know that it's yet to come out. So when does it come out?
So it's going to be released on iTunes on May 19th. You can pre-order it now. So get on over to iTunes. You can find the film and the iTunes link at thelaststopfilm.com/watch. You can find the iTunes link, and it will be available on more VOD platforms and DVD and Blu-ray very soon too. It was picked up by Gravitas Ventures, and they're very, very good with distributing independent films and documentaries. So there's plenty of places to find it.
Anything else? Any other links or ways for people to access stuff that you're doing?
I mean, the film is pretty much it for right now. I mean, we're always talking about doing follow-ups. There are going to be some future projects about the Élan story and about the troubled teen industry that are coming out, and I'll update the webpage with that eventually. So definitely stay tuned. But yeah, if you go to our webpage, you can join our discussion group on Facebook. And find out more about it, and just searching in Google about Élan and or the troubled teen industry, you'll find a lot of information about it. It really is a rabbit hole, and like I said, everybody that starts going down it, I get an email saying, hey, when can I see the movie or whatnot. But I did make this film to kind of sort of be a comprehensive medium to explain what it was like being at one of these schools. So if you're curious, the documentary is definitely worth seeing.
Todd Nilsen, it's been really great talking to you, and thank you for all your work. I'll, of course, link to things in the show notes.
All right. Well, Zach, thank you very much. I'll talk to you soon.